Parents break too, they just do it quietly. You never saw it, did you? The way your mother's hands trembled after slamming the door. The way your father stared blankly at the wall at 2 a.m., trying to hold in the screams. They didn't cry in front of you. They didn't collapse. They kept the lights on, packed your lunch, smiled when you walked in. But inside, they were falling apart. Parents don't always scream when they break silently. And if you were too young to notice, it's not your fault. But now that you're old enough to understand, you must, because the healing we're all searching for starts not with blame, but with seeing what was always unseen. The silent struggle. We grow up thinking our parents are made of stone. They wake us up, pack our bags, cook our meals, fix what's broken. They show up every day, and we assume they're fine. But they weren't. They just became masters at masking the storm, not because they wanted to deceive us, but because they believed it was their job to protect us from the chaos that was swallowing them whole. You saw your mom as strong, but you didn't see the way she stood in the shower too long just to cry where no one could hear her. You saw your dad as unshakable, but you didn't notice how he sat in silence every night, staring at the floor, carrying burdens he never named. They were breaking, quietly, and you were just a child, thinking the world was normal. That's the danger of quiet pain. It doesn't scream. It whispers through clenched jaws, tired eyes, forced smiles, and we miss it. They showed up to parent-teacher meetings, birthday parties, family dinners, all while dealing with layoffs, lost dreams, silent fights, and the echoing question, am I failing my family? You didn't see the bills piling up, the sleepless nights, the loneliness in their marriage, the dreams they buried to raise you. They chose silence, not because they were cold, but because they believed love meant enduring in silence. And somewhere along the way, we mistook that silence for strength, instead of unseen suffering. Here's the painful truth no one tells you growing up. Parents are not superheroes. They're people who bleed quietly, while pretending they don't. And the tragedy, most of us don't realize this until it's too late, until they're gone, or until life has beaten them into shadows of who they once were. So here's the emotional reckoning. What if the strength we admired was just a cover for how broken they truly felt? What if you missed their cry for help, not because you were selfish, but because they never let it show? That realization hits like a punch to the gut, but don't run from it, because this is where your transformation begins, not in blaming yourself or them, but in choosing to see them as humans, not roles. You can't rewrite the past, but you can choose what you do now. You can ask deeper questions. You can forgive things you didn't understand back then. You can break the cycle by speaking what they buried. And most of all, you can begin to heal by honoring the pain that was passed down, not punished for. The struggle was never just yours. They broke too. They just did it quietly. The role, we never saw them escape. They didn't set out to lose themselves, but somewhere between paying bills, managing tantrums, suppressing emotions, and holding the house together, they stopped being who they were, and became who they thought they had to be. Mothers became caretakers, fathers became providers, and over time, the person behind the role faded into the background. Your dad had dreams once, your mom had passions, talents, stories, and untamed laughter before the world told her, be responsible. But once they became parents, something shifted, not overnight, but slowly, like a candle that burns too long. They stopped asking what they wanted. They stopped chasing what made them come alive, because they thought sacrifice was the highest form of love. And maybe it is, but what happens when the sacrifice becomes self-erasure? See, no one teaches parents how to hold on to their own identity while raising another. They're taught how to show up, how to give, how to carry everything, but not how to breathe as themselves. And the tragedy, most of us never noticed. We saw them as providers of stability, discipline, food, structure, never as people who had their own wars going on inside. They laughed less, they dressed simpler, they abandoned hobbies, they stopped dreaming, not because they didn't want to, but because they convinced themselves their time had passed. And we, unknowingly, watched them dim, thinking, this is adulthood. But it wasn't. It was a quiet form of death, the slow fading of personal identity in the name of responsibility. And we inherited more than just their sacrifices. We inherited the silence, the suppression, the pressure to survive instead of live. Here's where this hits hardest. They played the role so well, we forgot it was a role. They were hurting, but they kept the routine going. They were lost, but they smiled at the dinner table. They were unfulfilled, but they kept showing up like machines. Why? Because they believed love meant giving up who you are, to help someone else become who they're meant to be. Let that sink in. Your life was built on a foundation of someone else's forgotten self, and maybe that's why there's a voice inside you now that says, don't let this cycle continue. So here's your breakthrough. What if your healing begins by seeing them, not as what they became, but as who they used to be? What if honoring them means helping yourself escape the same role before it consumes you? They didn't fail. They just got stuck in a role that no one ever taught them how to step out of. And now, you get to be the generation that reclaims identity without guilt. When they cracked behind closed doors, you didn't always see it, but it happened. After the house got quiet, after the lights were turned off, after everyone else had what they needed, they sat on the edge of the bed, in the dark, and cracked. Not with screams, not with chaos, but with a silence that was deafening. Tears they never explained. Eyes that stayed open longer than they should have. Hands gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, holding back a tidal wave of emotions they had no words for. See, breaking down doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's your father pacing the hallway at 3 a.m. Not because he's restless, but because he's drowning in bills, fear, and shame for not doing more, even when he's already given everything. Sometimes it's your mother staring blankly at the laundry basket, because she's thinking, is this all I am now? A machine for everyone else's needs. But they never told you that. They protected you from it. They smiled through it. They pushed through the next day as if nothing happened. That's the thing about quiet suffering. It leaves no bruises for the world to see. You just saw discipline, structure, rules, but behind that was a human being breaking in ways no one ever acknowledged. You thought they were just strict or cold. But the truth is, they were afraid. Afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of not being enough. Afraid their silence would swallow them whole. And sometimes it almost did. Their version of a panic attack, numbness, shutting down emotionally so they wouldn't collapse in front of you. That moment they forgot your birthday, they were too deep in their own depression to remember what day it was. But you never knew, because they made pain invisible. They made survival look normal. And that's what's dangerous. We start mistaking quiet suffering for strength. But strength isn't never breaking. Real strength is knowing when you've cracked, and choosing to keep showing up anyway. They weren't invincible. They were just committed, to you, to the family, to holding it all together, even if it meant breaking silently behind closed doors. You want to talk about love? That's love. But love without release turns into pressure. And pressure, over time, crushes even the strongest souls. If you've ever wondered why they seemed emotionally distant, why they didn't say I love you more, why they looked tired even after sleeping, it's because they were carrying more than you could see. So the next time you look back at your childhood, ask yourself, what was happening in the silence? That's where the truth lived. And here's what's powerful. When you recognize their silent pain, you stop repeating it. Because silence may have been their coping mechanism, but it doesn't have to be yours. Let this be where the generational echo stops, and your voice begins. Their trauma wasn't your fault, but it affected you. What broke them didn't start with you. That pain you felt growing up, the yelling, the distance, the silence, the moments you thought, what did I do wrong? It wasn't about you. It never was. You were simply in the blast radius of someone else's unresolved war. Your mother didn't become emotionally withdrawn because of you. She learned to numb herself long before you were born. Maybe from a father who never listened, or a mother who loved her conditionally. Your father didn't lash out because you spilled the milk. He was battling years of self-worth issues, possibly from being told he'd never be enough by someone he desperately tried to impress. You inherited the consequences of pain they never healed from. This is generational trauma, unhealed wounds passed down like old furniture, not because they wanted to hurt you, but because they didn't know any other way to survive. You learned love through confusion, safety through silence, and your identity through their chaos. So you started shaping yourself around what wouldn't trigger them. You became the peacemaker, the achiever, the one who didn't cause trouble, not because that's who you were, but because that's what made you feel less unsafe. You carried guilt that wasn't yours. You mistook their suffering as your responsibility, and for years, you might have hated yourself for not being enough to make them happy. But here's the truth. You were a child. You weren't supposed to fix anyone. You weren't supposed to absorb their emotional weather like a sponge. You were supposed to be protected, not programmed. This isn't about blaming them. It's about freeing yourself. Because as long as you think their brokenness was because of you, you'll keep trying to earn love that was never yours to chase. Read that again. You'll keep trying to earn love that was never yours to chase. What affected you was real. What hurt you was valid. But the cause, it was deeper than you, older than you, bigger than you. That should break your heart, but also empower it. Because once you realize the pain didn't start with you, you gain the power to stop it with you. You don't have to repeat what they did. You don't have to raise your voice the way they did. You don't have to abandon your own needs just to keep someone else emotionally stable. This is your moment, the one they never had. The moment to say, it wasn't my fault, but it still hurt me. And now, I heal. You're not dishonoring them by breaking the pattern. You're honoring the version of them that never got the chance. Let your healing be the rebellion. Let your awareness be the closure. And let your growth be the legacy that finally shifts the story. This is where pain ends and power begins. The guilt they silently carried. They didn't say it out loud, but they felt it. The guilt, the regret, the echo of moments they wished they could take back. Not because they were bad people, but because they were broken in ways they didn't know how to fix. Oh, in private. Not out of hate, but because they didn't know how else to express love when love to them had always been painful or conditional. They carried it in their silence, in the way they looked away when you cried, in the way they raised their voice and later sat alone, ashamed, in the way they praised you in public, but criticized you. Maybe your father laid in bed at night, wondering why he got so angry. Maybe your mother cried in the kitchen after you stormed off, hating herself for making you feel small, but they didn't show it. Why? Because their generation didn't teach them how to apologize. It taught them how to survive. It taught them to be strong, hold it in, and never let them see you weak. So they buried their guilt under routine, under responsibility, under the belief that this is just how life is. But that guilt never left. It festered. It showed up in the quiet moments, when they looked at you and saw not just their child, but the person they failed to fully understand. You see, guilt isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the gifts they buy, instead of the words they can't say. Sometimes it's in the way they overcompensate later in life, trying to be present in your adulthood, because they missed too much of your childhood. And sometimes, it's just in the way they hold you a little longer when you hug them, like they're silently asking for forgiveness they'll never voice. You didn't hear them say I'm sorry, but you felt it, in their actions, in their hesitations, in their late attempts to reconnect. And here's the truth, they didn't know how to be perfect parents. No one taught them how. They were navigating their own emotional storms while trying to raise you at the same time. You were trying to feel seen. They were trying not to drown. But guilt was always there. Not because they didn't love you, but because deep down, they feared they never loved you the way you needed. This is not to excuse the pain. It's to humanize the people behind it. Because when you realize they weren't just your parents, they were people. People who messed up. People who hurt. People who wished they had done better. You open the door to something powerful. Compassion. Not for what they did, but for what they held inside, and never knew how to heal. And maybe, just maybe, that's where your healing begins too. What they gave up so you could live. You saw them every day, making dinner, paying bills, showing up to work, repeating the same routine. But what you didn't see was what they left behind. The dreams they never chased, the risks they never took, the versions of themselves that died quietly, so you could live fully. Maybe your mother wanted to be an artist. Maybe your father dreamed of opening his own shop. Maybe one of them had music in their soul, or words in their heart they never spoke out loud. But life came knocking, with diapers, deadlines, and responsibilities. They gave up more than comfort. They gave up themselves. They put their passions on pause, so you could press play on yours. They stayed in jobs they hated, so you'd never have to feel unsafe. They sacrificed identity, rest, expression, all so you could become something they could never be allowed to become. They didn't complain, but not because it didn't hurt, because they decided you were worth more than their pain. You'll never fully know how many silent sacrifices they made, how many late nights they worried about money while pretending everything was fine, how many times they went without so you could have enough, how many moments they bit their tongue, swallowed pride, held back tears, just so you wouldn't have to feel what they felt growing up. It's easy to see what they failed to give emotionally, but it takes emotional maturity to recognize what they gave up quietly. Not every parent gets it right, and not every sacrifice was healthy, but many of them lived a life of quiet erosion, slowly disappearing behind duty, just to build the foundation for your life. They didn't get applause, they didn't get thanks, but still they gave. So before you judge their silence, ask what it cost them to keep the lights on. Before you criticize their emotional distance, ask what kind of emotional inheritance they were given. Before you resent them for not becoming more, realize they may have poured everything they had into becoming enough for you. And maybe they didn't tell you how proud they were. Maybe they didn't know how to love in the language you needed, but somewhere deep inside, they hoped their sacrifices would say what their word never could. I gave up so much, just so you could become everything I couldn't. This isn't about glorifying pain, it's about recognizing truth. Not all parents sacrificed from love, but if yours did, even just a little, then your story carries pieces of their silent surrender. Honor that, live in a way that redeems it, and never forget, sometimes love doesn't speak, it gives, and that is a legacy far more powerful than words. When they were the child, once too before they were your parent, they were just a child, a little boy, a little girl, wide-eyed, hopeful, needing love, just like you did. But who loved them the way they needed? Who held your father when he cried in silence? Who told your mother she was enough, even when she failed? Who showed up for them, not as a disciplinarian or provider, but as a safe place? Maybe no one did. Maybe your dad learned to be tough, because nobody allowed him to be soft. Maybe your mom became emotionally distant, because vulnerability was punished, not protected. Maybe they grew up with broken parents too, parents who handed them a rule book, filled with fear, silence, and survival. What you received as strict may have been their version of structure. What felt like coldness may have once been neglect in their own story. What looked like emotional shutdown was their way of coping with chaos they never asked for. They were hurt before they ever had the chance to heal. And here's the uncomfortable truth. They didn't choose all the patterns they passed on. Some were inherited, some were the only tools they had. It's hard to give emotional presence when no one gave it to you. It's hard to speak love fluently when all you've ever heard is criticism. It's hard to break cycles when you don't even know you're inside one. So when they parented you from a place of silence, it wasn't always because they didn't love you. Sometimes, it was because they didn't know how to show it, and you were too young to understand that your parents were carrying their own childhood pain into your present moment. That sometimes the anger wasn't even about you, it was about them, the child inside them, still screaming for safety, for validation, for relief. They never got the healing they needed, so they handed you a legacy of wounds wrapped in silence. But now you know, now you can see them, not just as your parent, but as a scared young soul who didn't get what they needed, and tried their best anyway. This doesn't excuse abuse, it doesn't erase pain, but it does unlock understanding, because empathy is power, and power is what breaks the cycle. You were never just their child, you are also the bridge between generations. The one who sees, the one who feels, the one who heals. Your pain wasn't just yours, it was passed down, but your healing, that's where the transmission ends. Let them be human, see them as the broken children they once were, and in doing so, you begin to reclaim yourself, because when you forgive the child inside them, you finally set the child inside you free. Your pain is valid, and so is theirs. You don't have to choose. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt, just because you understand why it happened. You don't have to silence your scars, just because you see where they were bleeding too. You can hold both truths in the same heart. Yes, they did the best they could, but yes, it still wasn't what you needed. You were allowed to want more. You were allowed to need gentleness. You were allowed to crave protection, support, and emotional safety, even if your parents never had those things themselves. There's this myth we've been fed, that if you empathize with your parents, your pain disappears. That understanding their wounds erases yours. That's not healing, that's self-erasure. The truth, your pain is valid, period. Even if they meant well, even if they were trying their best, even if they were good people, because good people can still hurt others. Broken people can still break things, and even unintentional wounds can run deep. You are allowed to grieve what you didn't get. You're allowed to mourn the hugs that never came, the apologies that never arrived, the words you so desperately needed, but never heard. That grief doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you honest. And honesty is the foundation of healing. But here's what's powerful. You don't have to stay stuck in that pain. You don't have to carry resentment like a shield, because bitterness won't protect you. It only anchors you to a past that can't be changed. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Compassion doesn't mean condoning. It means you're choosing peace, not because they earned it, but because you deserve it. You deserve the freedom to let go, to stop reliving the scenes in your head, to stop needing them to admit everything just so you can finally breathe, to stop waiting for a perfect apology that may never come. You can hold space for your truth, and still hold space for theirs. You can honor your pain, while acknowledging their limitations. You can reclaim your voice, without silencing theirs. This is the paradox of maturity. The more you heal, the more you understand, and the more you understand, the less you need to be right. Healing is when you stop needing the past to change, because you have. It's when you stop demanding justice from people who didn't even know they were causing harm, and you choose to become the one who breaks the cycle instead. This is your invitation to stand in the fire of duality, where grief and grace exist together, where empathy does not erase pain, but transforms it. Because when you say, "My pain matters, and so does yours," you rise above what broke you, and you begin to write a new story, one where you are finally seen by yourself. Forgiveness isn't always reconciliation. It's freedom. Forgiveness is not a handshake. It's not a conversation. It's not waiting for them to admit what they did. It's you choosing to put down the emotional chains that are choking your growth. See, we were taught that forgiveness means going back, going home, making peace face to face. But that's a lie that keeps millions trapped. Forgiveness isn't a reunion. It's a release. It's the quiet internal revolution where you take your power back from the stories that once defined you. Forgiveness says, you no longer control my nervous system. You don't get to take up space in my mind, my heart, or my identity anymore. Because every time you carry resentment, you're still letting them write your story. You're still living under the shadows of a pain they may not even remember causing. And that is not who you were born to be. You were not created to live in reaction to someone else's inability to love you properly. You were created to rise, to choose peace even when you didn't receive it, to build a life that doesn't revolve around what they couldn't give. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is bravery in its purest form. It's saying, I see the wound, and I no longer need revenge to heal it. You might never get an apology. They might never admit what they did. They might never change. And still, you get to be free. This is your moment to stop drinking the poison of bitterness and expecting it to punish them. It doesn't. It only rots your spirit from the inside out. Here's what's even deeper. Sometimes forgiveness means no contact. It means walking away without closure. It means loving them from a distance. It means honoring your peace above their comfort. It means refusing to play small just to maintain the illusion of family. Forgiveness does not always look pretty, but it always feels lighter. And when you finally choose it, not for them but for you, everything begins to change. You start sleeping better. You stop repeating patterns. You breathe deeper. You feel lighter. You begin creating instead of surviving. That's the power of real forgiveness. It's not reconciliation. It's not a warm hug and a movie ending. It's the moment your soul says, I'm done letting this live rent-free inside me. So no, you're not weak for walking away. You're not wrong for setting boundaries. You're not heartless for choosing you. You are healing. You are shedding the trauma that was never yours to carry. And you are finally stepping into a life where the pain of your past doesn't write the next chapter. That is freedom. Absolutely. Here is the rewritten final section of your video script, crafted to leave your audience emotionally moved, deeply connected, and convinced to stay with your channel for healing, truth, and transformation. Section 10. They broke quietly. You'll heal loudly. Exactly 500 words. Final conclusion plus CTA. They never talked about it. The silent heartbreak. The dreams they buried under bills. The anxiety they choked down to keep the lights on. The childhood wounds they never got to outgrow. They just kept going. They broke quietly, behind closed doors, behind fake smiles, behind I'm fine. And if you grew up never hearing, I'm proud of you. If love felt like pressure, If safety felt unpredictable, you didn't imagine that, you inherited it. But here's the breakthrough. You don't have to pass it on. You are not just a continuation of their silence. You are the disruption. You are the one standing in the ruins, choosing not to numb, not to hide, but to feel it all, and still run. That's power. Because healing loudly doesn't mean it means truth. It means saying, this pain stops with me. It means choosing peace over people pleasing. It means letting go of loyalty to suffering. You didn't choose your trauma, but you can choose your transformation. And yes, it's hard. Yes, it's uncomfortable. But your future, your children, your relationships, your self-worth deserve more than silence. You were born to be the cycle breaker. The one who doesn't settle. The one who chooses healing even when no one claps. The one who creates a life so different, it makes the pain worth it. So this is your reminder. You are not alone. You are not broken beyond repair. And you are not crazy for wanting more than survival. This channel is your space. For truth, for healing, for messy transformation and radical honesty. Stick with us, because each video, each story, each message here is a brick in the foundation of your new life. So don't just watch, grow, speak, heal loudly. Your parents may have broken in silence, but you'll rebuild out loud, with purpose, with truth, and with a voice they never got to use. If this resonated with even a small part of you, don't scroll away, hit subscribe, and let this be your first loud choice. Comment below, I'm the one breaking the silence. Let's heal together, because your story isn't over, it's just beginning.